I lit the last candle on the table and stepped back to admire the glow. The roast was in the oven, the salad tossed and waiting in the fridge, and the fresh bread wrapped in linen on the counter. I'd even made the blueberry cobbler early, my daughter-in-law's favorite, and left it cooling near the window. Everything was ready. I checked my phone. 3:18 p.m. The party was set for 3:00, but I knew people ran late, especially families, especially mine. I opened the group text. One message from earlier that morning. Caleb, we're almost there, Mom. That was 5 hours ago. At first, I busied myself with harmless tasks, fluffing the couch pillows, straightening the napkins, checking the silverware for smudges, even though I'd already polished them twice. I turned the music down just enough so that I could still hear footsteps if they came up the porch. But they never did. By 5, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table. The roast had long finished cooking and was now dry. The candles melted halfway down. One had dripped onto the runner. I didn't clean it up. I refreshed the group chat. Nothing. Then I did something I shouldn't have. I opened Instagram. The very first story was from Caleb's wife, Serena. Bright lighting, a table filled with food, her parents' kitchen. Her mother was holding my grandson, smiling. Caleb sat at the end of the table, carving what looked like grilled chicken. Their daughter, my granddaughter, was clapping as someone brought out a strawberry cake. The caption read, "Spontaneous dinner with family is always the best kind." I blinked. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I clicked again. More photos followed. Serena's dad popping open champagne, her brother holding a bottle of cider, grinning like he'd won something. My son's arm around his wife's shoulder. My granddaughter in a new dress I hadn't seen before. It was a full party. Their plates were full. Their faces were happy. And mine wasn't anywhere in the frame. I looked around the room. The flowers I bought yesterday were starting to sag. The bouquet in the center of the table had lost a few petals onto the tablecloth. The bread, still wrapped, sat untouched. The house was warm from the oven, too warm now, and the roast had long dried out. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside the porch, light flicked on with the setting sun. I had left it on a timer so it would welcome my family. Instead, it illuminated an empty front yard and the silence of a Saturday evening. My phone buzzed. I snatched it up, hope flickering for a second. It was a comment on one of Serena's photos. "Love this nothing like spending the weekend with people who matter most." I turned the phone face down on the table and sat again. This time, I didn't straighten anything. I didn't move the flower petals or adjust the sagging candle. I didn't get up when the cobbler started to go cold. I just sat there in the house I bought on my own, in the room I decorated with my hands, waiting for people who had already chosen to be somewhere else. And then I noticed something odd. Serena had tagged Caleb's sister in one of the photos, the one person I thought would never forget today. I clicked her profile. Her caption said, "So good to be with everyone." Felt like home. It wasn't a spontaneous dinner. It had been planned, carefully, quietly, without me. I stared at that screen, my fingers cold despite the heat still lingering from the oven, and realized they had never intended to come. I zoomed in on the photo like it might be a mistake. Maybe I'd see an empty seat and convince myself it had been saved for me. Maybe Serena had meant to invite me and forgot to press send. Maybe Caleb thought I was busy. Maybe. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The table was full. 10 chairs, 10 plates, 10 glasses. None of them mine. At the head of the table sat Serena's mother, smiling like it was her birthday. My son sat 2 seats away between his wife and her father, laughing at something. My granddaughter Harper had her favorite doll tucked under one arm, wearing the little yellow dress I gave her for Easter last year. She looked happy, and I wasn't anywhere in the picture. I tapped back to the post. 10 minutes ago. That meant, while I was still standing by the door adjusting the porch mat, just so they were already sitting down to dinner. While I was slicing the roast and pouring the wine, they were raising glasses somewhere else. I refreshed the screen. More posts. Serena's brother had shared a video of Harper chasing the family dog in the backyard. Caleb was standing off to the side, sipping something from a tumbler. Another photo popped up from Serena's cousin, a boomerang of champagne being poured into flutes. My wine glasses, cleaned and polished, sat untouched on the kitchen counter. It wasn't just that they had forgotten. They had planned something else. Without me. I went back through my messages just to be sure. I hadn't missed a cancellation. No apology. No, we're sorry something came up. The last thing Caleb had sent was from that morning. We're almost there, Mom. That was the part that stung the most. Not the absence. The lie. I closed the app and placed my phone down. Carefully. Like if I moved too fast, the truth might spill further. Then I walked to the kitchen and turned off the oven. The roast had dried out entirely. I covered it in foil anyway and slid it into the fridge. I packed up the salad, the bread, the cobbler. Every container felt heavier than it should have. I didn't cry. It was stranger than sadness. It was a quiet emptiness, like I had reached for something I was sure would be there and found air. I made coffee. Not because I wanted it, but because the house was too quiet. The coffee machine gave the kitchen some noise, something to ground me. I poured it into the mug Harper painted for me last Christmas. It had my name scrawled across one side in red marker and a crooked heart on the other. She had handed it to me with both hands, proud. So you can drink your coffee when you miss me. I took a sip now, and it was bitter. I sat at the dining table again, the same spot where I had waited all afternoon. The flowers had started to wilt a little. One candle had gone out on its own. The rest flickered with no one to notice. I opened my phone one more time. The newest post was from Serena. A group photo, everyone smiling, arms linked, plates cleared. Serena's caption read, "Thankful for the people who always show up." That's when I knew. This wasn't about forgetting. This was about choosing. I didn't buy this house for anyone else. That's what I kept telling myself as I walked through each room that night, barefoot, coffee still in hand. The lights glowed low in the hall, warm and soft, casting shadows on the walls I'd painted myself. I ran my fingers along the trim I had paid extra to restore. It was mine. Every corner, every decision, every dollar. My name was on the deed. Just mine. Not Caleb's. Not Serena's. Not even Harold's. It took me years to get here. 7 years since Harold passed. I was 59 when he died. 60 when I realized no one was going to pick up the pieces for me. 61 when I started saving in earnest, clipping coupons, skipping holidays, moving into a smaller rental with thin walls and no central air. While Caleb and Serena went on beach vacations and upgraded their SUV, I was picking up weekend shifts at the school library. While they redid their kitchen, I was meeting with a mortgage advisor who gently told me I'd need at least 3 more years, and I made it in 2. I don't think they understood what this house meant. Maybe I never explained it right. It's not that I expected a parade, but a dinner, a visit, a little joy for me, a little recognition that I had done something big, something I never thought I'd do alone. The first time I turned the key in the front door, I stood there for 10 minutes before I stepped inside. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just breathed in the air like it belonged to me now, because it did. I hung the framed photo of Harold and me near the stairs. He would have loved the hardwood floors. I placed the yellow armchair by the window in the living room, the one I bought, used, and reupholstered myself. I chose the deep green for the bedroom walls because it reminded me of the pine trees in Washington, where we took our last trip together. There's not a single piece of this house that wasn't chosen with care, with intention, with sacrifice. And they didn't show up. They didn't even call. I walked into the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed I had made for Harper. The comforter was white with little sunflowers. There were new crayons on the nightstand, and her favorite books stacked neatly beside them. I had stocked the bottom drawer with pajamas in 2 sizes just in case. Her toothbrush was already in the holder in the bathroom down the hall. I had made space for her, for them, and they made plans somewhere else. The clock read midnight before I moved again. I turned off the candles, locked the front door, and turned off the porch light. Then I walked back upstairs, placed the coffee mug in the sink, and sat down on the bed I had made for myself. The quilt was one I'd stitched over winter. Pale blue with a row of tiny stars. I reached over to my nightstand and opened the drawer. Inside was the envelope with the deed. The embossed paper with my name, my address, the official seal. I held it for a moment. It felt heavier than I remembered. Then I put it back, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I had waited my whole life for a home that was mine. I just didn't know I'd be the only one celebrating it. The voicemail came the next morning, right after I tossed the roast in the trash. The meat had gone cold and gray, the fat congealed in thick folds. I hadn't eaten the night before. I wasn't hungry. The notification blinked while I stood at the sink, rinsing out wine glasses. No one touched. "Hi, Corinne. It's Serena. Just wanted to say sorry about yesterday. I guess we weren't sure if your invite was firm," Caleb said. "Maybe it wasn't happening anymore, and then my mom thought you'd canceled and..." She trailed off, then laughed nervously. "It was just a weird mix-up. We'll come by soon. Promise." The message ended there. No apology. Just that gentle tone Serena always used when she thought she was smoothing things over without actually fixing anything. I didn't call back. Not because I didn't want to. I had the words ready, but the second I opened my mouth, they turned to heat in my throat. It wasn't just the excuse, it was how natural it sounded, like she'd used it before, like I was supposed to shrug and move on. But I hadn't canceled. I had printed invitations, mailed them. I'd texted her the week before. "Let me know what wine you prefer, red or white." She answered, "That Pinot Noir from Oregon, the one we had at the lake house." I bought 2 bottles. They were still sitting on the bar cart, unopened. Labels pristine. I walked over and looked at them now. I could still hear her voice from last summer. "You always pick the good stuff, Corinne. Better than my mom does, that's for sure." I guess not anymore. I poured myself a glass. Just one. Then sat on the back deck and sipped it slowly. The morning was cool, the trees behind the fence rustling gently. I had planned for laughter here. Stories, maybe even s'mores for Harper, over a little fire pit. Now, the space felt like a stage after the play ended. Empty chairs, forgotten props. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through our texts. Everything was still there. Her confirmation. The photo I sent of the dining setup. The "can't wait to see it" message she replied with. I screenshotted it. Not for evidence. Just to remind myself I wasn't losing my mind. I didn't imagine being included. I was excluded. There's a difference. Around noon, Caleb finally texted. No call, no explanation. Just a message that read, "Hope you're okay. We'll swing by next week if that works." Next week. Like I was a coffee shop and they were checking hours. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the pantry and pulled out the little yellow notebook where I'd written everything for the housewarming. Grocery lists, seating plans, Serena's wine, Harper's snack preferences, Caleb's favorite mustard. I'd spent so much time preparing for them. Weeks, maybe months if you count all the imagining. And they missed it without blinking. The Pinot Noir tasted flat by the second sip. I poured the rest down the sink. Then I sat at the table again, where the wax from one candle had hardened into a little pool. I peeled it off with my nail and placed it in my palm. Cool, weightless. Useless now. I folded the wax in half, then in half again. Eventually, I dropped it in the trash, just like the excuse they gave me. At 9:41 p.m., just as I started rinsing the untouched wine glasses and wrapping the untouched roast in foil, my phone buzzed. It was Caleb. I didn't expect much, but part of me still hoped, foolish as that may be, that he would say something real, that he would at least acknowledge the hurt he'd left behind, like muddy footprints on clean tile. Instead, I got this, "Hey Mom, sorry about today. Serena's parents invited us super last minute and we were already out. Didn't mean to skip. Let's reschedule soon." Yeah, just that. No apology for leaving me sitting alone in a dress I hadn't worn in years. No mention of the candles I'd lit, the food I'd arranged, or the photo he hadn't known I'd seen his entire family, including my granddaughter, sitting around a table that wasn't mine. Didn't mean to skip, he said. Like I was a meeting. Like I was a dentist appointment that got pushed for a lunch that ran long. I sat down on the edge of the tub dish towel, still in hand, reading the message again. And again. There was no warmth. No recognition of how I'd waited by the door checking the porch light like a lighthouse keeper. Just a shrug disguised as a sentence. I typed, "Thanks for letting me know," then deleted it. Typed again. "You could have called." Deleted that too. For a long time, I just stared at the blinking cursor. I thought about every birthday I'd organized for him growing up. I remembered the sleepovers, the school fundraisers, the last-minute Halloween costumes when the store ran out of his size. I thought about that week in college when he got sick, and I drove 3 hours just to bring him soup. And now I was reduced to an afterthought in a text message sent during someone else's party. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the porch light, locked the front door, and finally pulled the roast out of the oven. It was cold now, overdone and dry. The skin on top was the wrong kind of crispy, but I carved a piece off anyway and sat down at the kitchen island. The table stayed set. I poured a glass of the Oregon Pinot Serena liked so much, opened it with the corkscrew Caleb bought me one Christmas, and drank slowly. It tasted metallic. Off. Or maybe that was just me. Somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked. Not from footsteps, just from age and quiet. I ate the meal I had planned for 12. Then I loaded the dishwasher and sat in front of the fireplace that hadn't been lit yet, watching a flame that wasn't there. Eventually, I stood up, turned out the kitchen lights, and padded upstairs. The guest rooms were still made up. Crisp sheets, fresh towels, a basket of little soaps in the bathroom just like at hotels. I had thought Harper would enjoy that. She loved little details. But they never made it past my driveway. I reached the top of the stairs and paused in front of the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back, tired, disappointed, and older than I'd allowed myself to feel in months. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the frame, thinking maybe I'd imagined all of this. Maybe tomorrow it would feel small again. Silly even. But then I remembered the photo. Serena's smile. Harper's dress. My son lifting his glass like nothing was wrong. And I knew this wasn't a one-time oversight. It was a pattern. I stepped into my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and picked up the yellow notepad from the drawer. And I began to make a list. The card set was still in the closet third shelf, from the top wrapped in matte navy paper with silver ribbon. I'd spent 3 weeks looking for it online, tracking down the exact vintage series Miles had started collecting last summer. A full set from 1998, still sealed, still crisp. He's only 11, but when he talks about baseball, his whole face changes. It's the one time he looks like a child and an old soul at the same time. I used to keep a glove in my old apartment just so we could toss the ball around in the backyard when he came over. But that gift, his birthday gift, housewarming gift, whatever you want to call it gift, never made it out of the closet. I'd planned to surprise him after dinner. It was supposed to be a moment. Just me and him. Something small but thoughtful. Something that said, "You matter to me. I still see you." Instead, I saw him through a screen. It was Serena's sister who posted the video. I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't still been awake at 1 a.m., scrolling like I was looking for a wound I hadn't finished bleeding from. There he was, standing in front of a sheet cake in someone else's dining room, unwrapping a new gaming headset, while people clapped and laughed off-screen. He smiled, held it up to show the camera, and then leaned over to hug someone. Serena's father, I think. The caption read, "Surprise gift haul for the best kid." Not once did I see Caleb. Not once did I hear my name. No mention of a housewarming. No sign that I had even existed that day, except as a rescheduled obligation they hadn't bothered to follow up on. I paused the video, rewatched it, froze it on Miles's smile, something that used to show up first when he saw me on the porch. That boy hadn't seen the card set, didn't know about the glove still hanging in my garage, didn't remember how many hours we spent digging through yard sale bins for old cards and sleeves to protect them. I got up, went to the closet, and pulled the gift down. The ribbon was still tight, untouched. I carried it to the kitchen and set it on the counter. It looked expensive now, out of place. Something that belonged in a different home, maybe a different version of this family. I stared at it for a while, then walked it out to the garage and placed it on the top shelf next to a box labeled Caleb, college stuff. I hadn't opened that one in years either. Back inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee. Too late for it, but I didn't care. The bitterness helped. I sat by the window, fingers wrapped around the mug, the house silent around me. This house was supposed to be where new memories started. The beginning of a different kind of chapter 1, where I wasn't just passing through but finally rooted. A place for holidays, birthdays, and laughter that didn't have to be borrowed. But now it felt like a house that had braced itself for celebration and been left standing in the quiet. I could still smell rosemary and garlic from the roast. I could still see the gift sitting in my grandson's hands if I let myself imagine it. But that's all it was now. Imagination. A party that never happened. A gift they never opened. I looked at the notepad still sitting on the table where I'd written 3 names the night before, and under it I added one more. It wasn't just the housewarming. That's the truth I had been avoiding all week. It hadn't started with the unopened gift, or the voicemail, or the Instagram post. It had been building like sediment, years of small slights, layering one over the other until they shaped something heavy. I saw it clearly now, the quiet pattern of being last. At Caleb's wedding, I had worn pale green, not wanting to outshine anyone. Serena had said she liked the color. I made sure the dress wasn't too formal, not too mother of the groom, as if that were something to be ashamed of. But when I arrived, the usher looked confused for a moment and asked if I was with the catering team. I smiled, laughed, said nothing. They seated me near the restroom, not even close to the dance floor. The DJ speakers buzzed overhead, and the smell of disinfectant wafted out every time someone came or went. I sat through the toasts, watching Caleb and Serena clink glasses and beam at her parents, front and center. Her mother gave a speech. Her father danced with the bride. No one mentioned me. Later, when I asked Serena quietly, gently, why I hadn't been included in any of the speeches, she said, "Oh, Corinne, we just didn't want it to feel crowded. You understand, right?" And I said yes. Of course I did. I always did. I remembered Caleb's college graduation, too. He was the first in our family to earn a degree. I was proud. God, I was proud. I baked cookies for his roommates, drove 12 hours in a rental car, booked my own hotel. I wore a blouse with little embroidered flowers on the cuffs, my small celebration. When I brought up the idea of dinner afterward, something quiet and simple. Just the 3 of us. Caleb hesitated. Serena's folks already planned something, he said. But maybe coffee in the morning, and Mom try not to make it about you, okay? That one stung. Still does. I remembered that line even now, sitting in my own living room surrounded by unopened wine bottles and spotless dishes that never got used. Try not to make it about you. As if wanting a moment, a seat at the table, a photograph, a slice of cake was some kind of crime. Even birthdays had become an exercise in restraint. They called late, if at all. Gift cards emailed with no message. A missed call and a promise to do something soon. The soon never came, but I had kept hoping, kept rearranging my own schedule to fit theirs, kept pretending the crumbs were a meal. I think the worst part wasn't the being left out. It was how expected it had become, how routine, and how well I'd learned to swallow it. I'd become a woman who made herself small so others wouldn't feel crowded. The helper, the background, the one who understood, always understood. But now, sitting in this house I bought with my name on the deed in a chair I picked out myself, I wondered what I'd been understanding all this time. Because it wasn't just forgetfulness. It was permission. Somewhere along the way, I had taught them that my silence was love, that my absence didn't matter, that showing up for me was optional. And now they believed it. I looked around the living room, the candles burned low, the flowers on the sideboard starting to curl at the edges. I had made a home, but they'd never seen it. Because they'd never looked. I walked the house like it was something sacred. Not because it was grand or new, it wasn't, but because it was mine. Every inch of it bore my fingerprints. Every crack filled, every hinge tightened, every color on the walls chosen with a level of care no one had ever asked about. In the hallway, I ran my hand along the soft taupe paint. 2 coats I did myself over a long weekend. My wrist ached for days, but I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. I still remember the way the roller felt in my hand, the slow rhythm of it. I'd put on old records while I worked. Bill Withers, Nina Simone, voices that carried me. The kitchen tile, I laid it with my friend Marianne, who came every Sunday for a month with her toolbox and her blunt honesty. We laughed, cursed, ruined 2 good pairs of jeans. The grout lines weren't perfect, but they were ours. And now, every time I wipe the counters, I see those uneven seams and smile. They're real. They belong to someone. I installed the shelves in the pantry, bought the lumber myself, measured twice, cut once. Well, twice one shelf still slants slightly forward, and I never fixed it. It holds canned beans and boxes of pasta just fine. I planted the lavender out back, dug through soil packed with old nails and broken glass remnants of a long-forgotten shed. My gloves tore. I didn't stop. I pulled the weeds until my hands bled, then kept going with dish rags wrapped around my palms. I patched drywall in the spare room after a pipe leak. Watched videos online. Learned how to float compound with a putty knife I bought secondhand. Took 3 tries to get it smooth. Painted over it in a soft blue no one else liked, but made me feel calm. It's now my reading room. When the roof leaked, I climbed up myself with a flashlight and a trash bag. Not to fix it, just to see where it was coming from. I paid a local contractor after that, watched every step of what he did, asked questions, took notes. The front porch swing, I found it at a garage sale. Sanded it down, stained it deep oak, sealed it twice. Hung it on chains I had to drill into the beam myself. When I finished, I sat there for an hour, sore and sweating, just to feel it move. No one asked me how I managed any of it. They saw the finished product, a house warm with light and smell and color, and assumed it had just appeared. Or maybe that someone else had done it. A contractor, a handyman, a neighbor with free time. Not a woman in her 60s with a stubborn spine and a YouTube playlist labeled How to Fix It When You're Alone. Sometimes I wondered if Caleb thought this was just another condo, that I'd signed a check and pointed at Pinterest photos, that it didn't cost me anything. Because if they didn't see the labor, if they never asked, did they think the reward was free? I moved to the back door and looked out at the yard. The rosemary bush was growing wild again. I'd need to cut it back before it overtook the fence. The light was shifting. Late afternoon creeping in. I pressed my palm to the doorframe. There was still dust in the corners. A spider web near the hinge. Good. This house was still becoming. Just like I was. I opened the drawer like I'd done a dozen times before, but this time, I didn't hesitate. No lingering. No second guessing. Just the quiet shuffle of papers that had waited too long. The will sat at the bottom. A manila folder creased at the corners, labeled in my own handwriting, Estate. Final. Inside were names I'd chosen years ago. Names I once held like promises. My son. His wife. My granddaughter. Contingencies. Percentages. Sentences like, in the event of my passing, that I had once written with a tremble in my hand, thinking love would keep the rest stable. I laid it out on the table next to the deed. My name in bold. No co-signer. No secondary name. Just Corinne Elise Thatcher. I had earned every syllable of that independence. I'd paid for it in hours and skipped dinners in guilt and grace and gumption. And still, I had offered the fruits of it freely until they stopped showing up. The envelope was last. I hadn't touched it in over a year. White. Sealed. Stamped from the attorney's office. I'd asked them to send me a copy after the last revisions just in case. I slid it open with a butter knife. It felt cold in my hand. Everything was still the same. I reread it line by line sitting at my dining table, the one meant for celebrations and birthdays and laughter that never came. When I reached the clause about my house, I stopped. Primary residence to pass in full, to my son, Caleb Thatcher. I closed the folder. The phone was already in my hand before I realized I'd made a decision. I called Simone Wilkes, estate attorney, efficient, unsentimental, the kind of woman who didn't blink when you said I've changed my mind. She picked up on the second ring. Corinne, it's been a while. Yes, I said. But not for much longer. I want everything changed. Her tone didn't shift. Understood. Same structure or something new? New, I said. Start from scratch. Specific requests? Yes. Remove Caleb and his family from all property and monetary disbursements. Completely. A pause. All of them. All of them. Another pause, but not a protest. Noted. Who would you like listed as primary beneficiary? I'm not sure yet, I said. Honestly. But it won't be blood. I can draw up a temporary trust while you decide she offered, assign it to the estate. Gives you time. Do that, I said. And Simone. Yes, this isn't anger. It's clarity. That part came out steadier than I expected. I believe you, she said. We'll need to notarize in person. I can come by Tuesday. Tuesday's fine. We hung up. No pleasantries. No awkward sympathy. I sat for a long while afterward, the pages still open in front of me. Somewhere down the hall, the heater clicked on. A hum filled the silence. The air was starting to chill. I folded the will back into its folder and placed it neatly in a new drawer, the one I labeled Next. There was no ceremony, no tears, just paper, just proof. I stood, walked to the back door and opened it wide. The scent of rosemary rushed in. I stepped outside barefoot onto the stone path I had laid myself. Behind me, the phone buzzed again. Caleb's name. A new message. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the edge of the yard and picked up the shears. The bush had grown wild, and I still knew how to trim it back. They showed up a week later as if nothing had happened. No flowers, no wine, not even a warm hello, just the sound of tires on gravel, a car door slamming, and the familiar cadence of my son's voice saying, We brought the kids. I opened the door already knowing it wasn't going to feel like a visit. It would feel like obligation. And it did. Caleb didn't meet my eyes. He gave me a quick hug, one of those shoulder pats that barely qualifies, and walked straight in like it was still the house he grew up in. Serena followed, sunglasses still on, clutching her bag, like she'd been dragged somewhere beneath her standards. Behind them, the kids ran through the living room, already asking for Wi-Fi and snacks. I had baked a fresh loaf of sourdough. It was still warm, and I'd sliced it neatly on the board, hoping maybe foolishly it would bring some ease to the room. No one touched it. Serena wrinkled her nose and asked if I had oat milk for her coffee. I didn't. We sat at the table I'd refinished by hand. Caleb commented on how the wood looked darker than he remembered. Serena leaned back in her chair and said, "Love what you've done. Shame it's so small." I didn't respond, just sipped my coffee and listened as they talked over one another about soccer practice, a birthday party at the in-laws, and whether the youngest had an allergy to tomatoes or just a sensitivity. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here because they realized I'd noticed. Serena wandered into the kitchen, at one point opened a cabinet without asking, and said, "Oh, still using ceramic mugs. You should see what my mom just installed, full brass fixtures and open shelving. Looks like a showroom." I smiled. A tight one. This isn't a showroom. She didn't hear me, or maybe just didn't care to respond. Caleb stayed mostly quiet. He helped the kids with their jackets when they got fidgety. I noticed he hadn't looked around the house once. Not really. Not like someone noticing a life someone else built. Lunch was a short affair. A salad bread and a vegetable stew I'd spent the morning preparing. Serena picked at hers. Caleb finished half a bowl, then offered a limp "thanks, Mom," before excusing himself to take a work call in the backyard. The kids didn't finish their juice. When they were done, they stood to leave. Not a single dish was cleared. My sink stood full bowls, half-empty cups, crumbs, forks. Not even a gesture toward rinsing. Serena hugged me loosely at the door, more of a lean than an embrace. "This was nice," she said with no conviction. "You'll have to come over sometime. My mom wants to show you her garden updates. She's thinking of adding a gazebo." I didn't say yes. I didn't say anything. Caleb finally met my eyes when he said goodbye. There was something unreadable in his face, something like guilt, but thinner. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Just turned hand on his son's shoulder and walked them all to the car. The gravel crunched again. Then silence. I stood at the doorway until they were out of sight, then turned and walked back to the kitchen. The dishes were still there. I didn't touch them right away. I just stood at the counter, hands braced on either side of the sink, and let the quiet settle again. A knock came at the door just as I reached for the dish towel. Not the front door, the side one. The one hardly anyone ever used. It wasn't them. I knew that much. The knock at the side door wasn't anyone I owed a smile to, which made it easier to ignore. I let it pass. I stood still until the silence returned. Then I cleaned the dishes methodically without resentment, though every clink of glass against porcelain reminded me of the people who had dirtied them without offering a hand. When the last cup was on the drying rack, I walked down the hall to the room no one else had seen, the office. It used to be Caleb's childhood bedroom. Faded posters of baseball players once lived on these walls. I remembered patching the drywall when he'd kicked it during some teenage tantrum. Something about a phone call he didn't want to explain. The patch was still there, smooth under the new paint. I'd chosen a calm gray, quiet neutral. I had replaced the old twin bed with a writing desk. The dresser was gone, replaced with filing cabinets. And on the shelves where action figures once stood, there were now lockboxes, legal folders, thick binders with tabs and dates I could recite from memory. No one goes in this room anymore, not even for curiosity's sake. I changed the doorknob last month, switched it to one with a lock. Bought it at the hardware store in town. Told the cashier it was for a little extra privacy. She didn't ask questions. Inside the filing cabinet was everything that mattered now. A new will. Notarized, signed, copied 3 times. The house deed updated. The small investment account I'd grown from years of side work tucked neatly into a new beneficiary structure. The retirement fund. The emergency trust. And one file labeled simply personal. That one held the letters. The ones I wrote but never sent. To Caleb. To my late husband. To myself. I reread the most recent one. Dated last Thursday. Dear Caleb, you don't know what I've protected you from. What I gave up so your father could leave something behind. What I swallowed so you wouldn't see what silence costs a woman. This house. It's not your legacy. It's mine. I slid the letter back in its folder and pushed it deep into the drawer, locking it before I stepped away. There was something calming about that click. This room wasn't about secrecy. It was about sovereignty. In this room, no one questioned my value. No one ignored my voice. No one interrupted, minimized, or redirected the conversation to someone younger, louder, or more charming. This was where my decisions lived now. Not at the dinner table. Not in a group text. Not in a voicemail half explaining why I'd been forgotten. I closed the door and twisted the lock. Back in the living room, I stared at the framed photo on the wall. Caleb at 12, holding a little league trophy I drove him to every practice for. I hadn't seen a trophy since. Just expectations. I walked over, took it off the wall, and carried it back to the office. It didn't belong out here anymore. Out here was what I chose to display now. Inside that locked room, that was where the truth stayed. That was where I held the proof. The power. I placed the photo in a drawer next to the binder. By the time I came back out, it was nearly dark. I turned on the porch light and sat with my coffee at the kitchen table. Tomorrow, I'd call the banker. I had more changes to make. The knock came just after noon. I nearly didn't answer. Lately, every knock came with a performance, either an apology in sheep's clothing or a compliment wrapped in condescension. But this one was different. Corinne, a voice called out. It's Margie from next door. I opened the door, and there she was, wrapped in a faded red cardigan and holding a mason jar of something steaming. I made too much chicken soup, she said with a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. Figured you might be up for some company. I stepped aside without thinking. You brought soup, you're already forgiven. She laughed, an easy, crackling laugh that made my hallway feel warmer. We sat in the kitchen, just 2 women who had lived long enough to stop apologizing for silence. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She just poured the soup into bowls and told me about her grandkids in Michigan and her tulips that bloomed too early this year. Half an hour later, another knock. It was John from 2 houses down. He had a brown paper bag under one arm and a smile under his beard. I saw Margie heading this way with something good, he said, lifting the bag. Thought I'd add to the feast. Inside was a still warm loaf of sourdough, his wife's recipe. They'd lived in this neighborhood longer than I had. I'd waved at them a dozen times but never really talked. Funny how easy it is to live beside people and still feel alone, until you don't. Soon the kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary. Margie said she always adds both to her soup, even when the recipe doesn't call for it. Keeps people from thinking it came out of a can. The 3 of us sat at the table I'd set for people who never showed. We passed the bread-refilled soup bowls and shared stories that didn't require tiptoeing around egos. I told them about the tile work in the kitchen and the paint in the hallway. John asked if I'd done it myself, and when I said yes, he didn't say really or wow at your age. He just nodded, like it made sense. Margie reached out and touched my wrist when I mentioned the housewarming. I didn't have to explain. The way her eyes softened told me she already knew what had happened or something like it. People forget, she said quietly, that we remember everything. We talked until the sun slid behind the fence and shadows crept across the tile floor. When they stood to leave, I walked them to the door. John promised to drop off more bread next week. Margie asked if I liked lemon bars. I said I did. After they left, I stood in the quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It didn't echo. The soup pot sat in the sink, half full. The loaf of bread was wrapped in a towel on the counter. I made tea, no coffee, and carried a cup to the front porch. A breeze moved through the trees, tugging at the chimes I'd hung under the eaves. The sky was streaked orange and pink. For the first time since that awful dinner that wasn't, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, but something close. I looked across the yard at Margie's porch light already on and thought, maybe tomorrow I'd drop off a pie. He showed up with coffee like that, fixed anything. Thought I'd bring your favorite, he said, holding the cup out like a peace offering. Vanilla, hazelnut, extra cream. The same kind he used to beg sips from when he was 15 and still thought I was interesting. Thanks, I said, taking it more out of habit than gratitude. He followed me into the kitchen, talking before the door even closed behind him. This place really has potential, he said, scanning the walls like he'd just walked into a fixer-upper. If you ever wanted to open up the back, maybe add a deck or a sunroom. Serena knows a guy. He's licensed. I didn't answer. He kept going. And maybe we could turn that front bedroom into a nursery someday, you know? I mean, you've got the space. I turned, then really looked at him. He said it so casually, like we'd all agreed this house was some community asset, something held in trust for their convenience. Planning a renovation, are we? I asked, my voice flat. Well, he said with a shrug, just thinking ahead. This place has good bones. It just needs a little vision. His eyes moved to the living room. The couch I saved for. The curtains I sewed. The side table from my first apartment. He saw a blueprint. I saw my life. I walked to the dining room, pulled a red binder from the drawer, and placed it between us on the table. He looked at it like I'd just dropped a weapon. What's that? That I said is everything already handled. He flipped it open slowly. Inside were documents he hadn't expected the revised. Will the trust papers, the deed transfer contingencies. Each page notarized, stamped, signed. I didn't say much, just watched his face as he skimmed. The folder that once held his name now held something else entirely. He blinked, confused. You made changes? I nodded. But you didn't even talk to me first. No, I said. I didn't. He sat back. Silence settled. The kind that doesn't get filled. You're serious, he said finally. I've never been more. He rubbed his jaw the way he did when he was trying to readjust the narrative. This house means a lot to the family, Mom. No, I corrected him. This house means a lot to me. He looked at the binder again, then at me. So, that's it. That's clarity, I said. Standing. And it's long overdue. He didn't argue. Not really. Just sat there staring at the binder as if trying to find a loophole in my decision. There wasn't one. I walked into the kitchen and poured the rest of his coffee into the sink. It smelled sweet, artificial. When I turned back, he was standing, his mouth open like he might say something important. But instead, he picked up his keys and left the cup on the counter. I didn't walk him to the door. I watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway, then paused at the curb, but he didn't look back. I wiped the counter clean and put the binder back in its drawer, locked it, then opened the pantry and pulled out a lemon for pie crust. Margie would be expecting one. The message came from Elise, my niece, on Richard's side. It was meant for someone else. A screenshot. No caption, just a long scroll of texts between names I recognized: Serena, Micah, Serena's parents, even Garrett and Elise herself. I stared at it for a while, before realizing what I was looking at. A group chat. Not the old family thread I was still technically in, where birthday messages and forwarded chain prayers died unread. This was new. At the top, fam planning, I wasn't in it. The messages ran back weeks. Serena had suggested a family dinner at her parents' place. Garrett chimed in. Sounds great. Corinne's doing something the same weekend, but we'll just swing by hers quick before. Swing by mine. Like I was a gas station on the way to a real destination. Someone named Mom. See. Serena's mother had sent a photo of her tablecloths. Another had shared catering options. Elise had offered to bring a gluten-free cake. They'd even discussed seating who would sit where. There was a message about not telling me so it wouldn't be awkward. My name wasn't mentioned often. But when it was only as a scheduling obstacle. I put my phone down slowly. My thumb hovered over the call button for Elise, but I didn't press it. I already knew how that conversation would go. Oh my God, Aunt Corinne. I didn't mean to send that to you. Then the flurry of backpedaling, the frantic apologies, the half-truths about planning, the repeated reassurance that, of course, I was part of the family, of course they loved me, that it wasn't intentional. But I had the receipts, quite literally. I walked over to the pantry and pulled the wine I'd chilled for the original housewarming, still unopened, still waiting for people who never showed. I uncorked it quietly. One glass, just enough to take the edge off the bitterness clawing at the inside of my chest. I stood in the doorway of my living room looking around. Everything here I had chosen. The chair by the window, the gold mirror above the fireplace, the soft rug where I sometimes read on Sundays. No one helped me build this life, but they all had opinions on how to live in it. I walked to the table and grabbed a pad of paper. Not my lawyer's yellow one, just a grocery list pad from the fridge. I started writing names, the ones who called, the ones who came by, the ones who brought coffee or soup or just silence that wasn't heavy. Then I made another list, the ones who left me out. I stared at both. I crossed out the second list. The doorbell rang just one chime, then quiet. I wiped my hands and opened the door. It was Margie holding a bowl covered with foil. I made that lemon pie, she said. You said yours didn't set right last time. I stepped aside. Get in here before it melts. She laughed and walked in like she belonged. Because she did. Behind her, the sky was just starting to shift pink, the kind of dusk that makes shadows stretch long and forgiving across the hardwood. We sat, we sliced pie, we poured coffee. And when the doorbell rang again, I didn't flinch. We were at the Saturday market picking through baskets of late-season peaches when Gwen leaned in casually and said, "By the way, Serena told us you guys bought the house together. I didn't know you had help with the down payment." I turned to her slowly, letting the weight of her words settle before I spoke. "Is that what she said?" Gwen shrugged, sorting through tomatoes. "I think she just meant you're all so close, like they were part of the process or something." I smiled, but it was the kind I'd learned to wear when something sharp was being twisted just out of sight. "No, dear," I said gently. I helped myself. Gwen blinked, sensing the edge under my calm. "Well," she said quickly, "it's a beautiful place. You must be proud." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The story Serena told, that was the real message. The way she painted herself as supportive involved part of the journey, when the truth was, they hadn't even visited the first time until the porch light had been on for weeks. She hadn't offered help. She hadn't even offered to carry a box. But now that the house stood painted and landscaped and filled with things I chose now, she wanted a line in the credits. I saw it for what it was. Not just ego, not just erasure. It was a quiet theft of narrative. If they could tell the story their way, then I didn't have to exist in it, not as the one who worked extra shifts, canceled trips, researched mortgage rates until midnight. No, in their version, I was the one lucky to be lifted by them. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the deed in front of me. My name, just mine. No co-signer, no co-investor. Just the woman who'd done it all. I texted Gwen later just a single photo of the deed folded open to the signature line. She replied within a minute. Got it. I didn't care if she showed anyone. Maybe I hoped she would. The following Monday, Serena called. So, Gwen mentioned you were upset. No, I said simply. I'm not upset. I'm just correcting the record. Silence. Garrett and I were only trying to explain how proud we are of you. That's all. Another rewrite. Another attempt to place herself close enough to the light to claim the warmth. I let her go on. I let her finish the part where she said they wanted to throw a joint family event at my house next month. That it would be more efficient and less confusing if everyone just gathered at mine going forward. I'll think about it, I said. But I already had. And what I was thinking about wasn't which date worked best. It was how many chairs I actually wanted to put out next time. When the call ended, I got up and walked down the hallway to the room they still hadn't seen, the one with the lock, the one with the binder. I opened the door, stepped inside, and flicked on the light. Everything was in order. Everything's still mine. I didn't send out invitations, just texts. Short ones. Dinner. Saturday. 6-0. Bring nothing but yourself. I didn't explain. Didn't offer reasons. I didn't owe those anymore. By 5:30, the house smelled like rosemary chicken, real rosemary. From the pot on my windowsill, I grew myself. The dining table was already set. Simple plates. The wine glasses I used to save for company I was trying to impress. Candles flickered low, just enough to soften the edges of the day. At 6:01, the first knock came. It was Marianne from across the street, holding her coat and smiling like she hadn't smiled in months. Behind her, Gwen, with a loaf of something warm, ignoring my text about not bringing anything. Then Hal and June, arms full of store-bought pie and half-laughed apologies. We knew you said not to bring anything but old habits. They came in easily. Like the house had always known them. Like the air was already shaped to fit their voices. No one asked where my son was. No one glanced at the door like they were waiting for someone who wouldn't come. We poured drinks, passed bread, and talked about things that weren't heavy. Garden plans. The city council's ridiculous new parking signs. The way the autumn light made the whole block look like a painting. The chair where Garrett would have sat stayed empty. So did the one beside it. Serena's usual spot, the one she always turned slightly, so she could angle her body away from me and talk only to her phone. I didn't miss the sound of her voice. Didn't miss Garrett's distracted chewing, the way he'd mutter "cool house mom" without really looking at it. But I did notice how Gwen complimented the lighting, how Hal asked for the chicken recipe, how June insisted we do this again soon, not as a favor, but as a fact. After dessert, we moved to the living room, plates on Lap's feet, tucked under throws. Someone put on music. Someone else found the coffee. I don't even remember who lit the fire. It just happened. Like warmth is something that gathers when people want to be exactly where they are. At some point, someone asked, "So any big plans for the holidays?" I smiled and said, "Maybe something small. Here, maybe." Gwen nodded. "That'd be nice. Real nice." I caught myself scanning the room, not for missing faces, but for the ones that were finally present. Really present. Laughing without tension. Listening without waiting to speak. No one performing. No one performing for me. After everyone left, I stood in the doorway holding the pie plate someone had forgotten, listening to the silence they left behind. It didn't echo. It didn't ache. It settled, like the house had taken a deep breath and was now finally exhaling. I locked the door, turned off the porch light, and let the quiet follow me all the way down the hallway, past the guest room, past the office to my bedroom. I hung up. My sweater sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder if I was being left behind. Because I wasn't. They just weren't coming with me. And I was already where I needed to be. The text came in on a Tuesday morning, just as I was watering the basil on the windowsill. "Hey, Mom, can we stop by for coffee this weekend? Serena and I want to talk about the future." No greeting, no apology. Just that familiar, casual tone, the kind that assumed I was always available. Always waiting, always ready to clear the schedule just in case they needed something. I read it once. Then again, I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel surprised. I felt done. I walked into the kitchen, placed the watering can on the counter, and stared at the stove where the coffee pot waited. My old reflex kicked in, the one that thought of cinnamon rolls, of folding napkins, of cleaning the back patio just in case they wanted to sit outside. Then I stopped myself. I didn't owe them coffee. I didn't owe them soft chairs or quiet forgiveness. I didn't owe them my Saturday morning. I replied, "Can't. I'm busy." And I left it at that. No smiley face. No promise to reschedule. No invented appointment to justify the boundary. I was just busy. Busy enjoying the calm of my own home. Busy protecting the peace I'd finally found. Busy not being the version of me who rearranged everything for people who only ever showed up when there was something to gain. The reply came within minutes. "Oh, okay. Maybe next week." I didn't answer. I put my phone face down, poured a cup of coffee for one, and sat on the porch where no one else had thought to sit with me the day of my housewarming. The oak tree in the front yard had started shedding. Yellow leaves drifted across the steps. I watched them settle in the sunlight and felt nothing but clarity. I sipped slowly, thinking of all the times I'd brewed coffee for conversations that were really just setups, requests wrapped in pleasantries. Just wanted to check in turned into, "Can we use your guest room? We thought you could watch the kids. It'd be easier if we stored things in your garage." This time, there was no door open to them. And it didn't feel petty. It felt precise. Later that day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. A voicemail followed. "Hey, it's Serena. We really just wanted to touch base. Didn't mean to catch you at a bad time. Let us know when's good for you." Her tone was sweet, controlled, the same one she'd used when asking if I'd consider adding them to my car insurance years ago. The kind of nice that came with conditions. I deleted the voicemail. That evening, I made pasta for one. Lit a candle anyway. Ate slowly, without reaching for my phone once. No interruptions. No small talk, layered with ulterior motives. After the dishes were washed and the house went quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. I flipped past the pages that had once been filled with grocery lists, reminders for birthdays, and notes about gifts for people who never said thank you. Instead, I started a new page. At the top, I wrote, "What I keep for me," and I let the list begin. I sat at the notary's desk, my pen steady the paper crisp beneath my palm. The document was exactly what I had asked for. Every clause reviewed twice, every line clear and final. The house was no longer just mine. It was part of something bigger now, a trust that would outlive me, outlive my son, outlive the years I had spent waiting for someone in my family to see what I had built. "Whenever you're ready," the notary said gently. I signed, Corinne Whitaker. One last time on one last line. The ink soaked into the page like it knew the weight of what it carried. This wasn't a donation made out of guilt or grief. It wasn't a reaction to a ruined dinner or a missed party. This was a decision I had grown into one quiet boundary at a time, until the outline of a new kind of life had formed around me. The trust would fund scholarships for women like me, women who worked behind the scenes, who held families together while their own dreams were shelved. Women whose names were left off of invitations, off of deeds, off of the record entirely. Girls who were told to wait, to quiet down, to not expect too much. Not anymore. I slid the signed page back across the table and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. A kind of release settled in my shoulders. Not a dramatic relief, but something deeper, like something that had been clenched for decades had finally loosened. The notary clipped the pages into a folder and handed me my copy. I folded it and placed it carefully in the leather bag I'd brought from home. Inside was the binder, the red one, and the updated will. Everything in order now. Everything mine to give away however I saw fit. Outside, the air had shifted. A breeze lifted my hair off my neck as I walked to the car. The sun was just beginning to lower, casting that golden stretch across the pavement, the one that made everything look softer, more honest. On the way home, I passed the old elementary school. The playground was empty, but the mural still stood along the back wall. A patchwork of handprints from a generation of children, long grown up. I pulled over and just watched it for a moment, remembering the afternoons I used to pick up my son, how he'd run to the car with grass stains on his knees and stories tumbling out of his mouth. Back when he still looked for my face in the crowd, I thought of him now, how far away that version of him felt, and how long I had tried to make sense of who he'd become. But that wasn't my job anymore. At home, I tucked the trust papers into the drawer in my office, the drawer no one was allowed to touch. The lock clicked into place. Then I poured a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the light shift across the living room floor. This house would one day belong to someone I'd never meet. Some girl who hadn't yet been told she was too much or not enough. She would walk through the front door and not know my name, but she'd feel it in the walls, and that was enough for me. That evening, I added one more line to the notebook I'd started the night I turned down the coffee invitation. What I keep for me, a legacy I chose with both hands. And in the silence of the house, I smiled. I had just poured my second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw my cousin Marlene standing on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself like she hadn't decided whether to knock or turn back. I hadn't seen her in months, maybe longer, but I opened the door anyway. I was driving by, she said, eyes soft. Thought I'd check on you. I stepped aside and let her in. No performance, no forced smiles. Just two women who shared some blood and a whole lot of quiet disappointments. She looked around as she entered, taking in the shelves, the rug, the faint scent of lemon oil and cedar. It's beautiful, she said, her voice a little tight. I nodded. Thank you. We sat in the living room where the afternoon sun spilled through the stained glass windows. I offered her coffee and she accepted. No small talk, no rehearsed updates, just stillness between sips. Then she asked, "You okay?" I looked at her and didn't bother reaching for a pleasantry. I finally stopped waiting for people who never planned to arrive. Her eyes flicked down. She nodded, like she understood too well. Like maybe she had her own list of unanswered invitations, texts left unread, birthdays turned into obligations. I didn't go to the party either, she said after a while. The one at Serena's parents' place. I saw the messages in the group chat and felt weird, like we weren't supposed to ask questions. I tilted my head. You don't owe me an explanation. I know. I just thought you should know. We sat in the kind of silence that didn't need fixing. Outside, the wind nudged the trees. Inside, the house stayed still, like it had learned how to breathe with only one occupant. She sipped again, then looked over at me. It's funny. When we were younger, I always thought you'd be the one with the noisy house. Big holidays, crowded tables, kids everywhere. I smiled faintly. So did I. And now I've got something better. A house that waits for no one. And a front porch that's still mine. She looked toward the window where the porch light sat above the door, still screwed in, still glowing faintly in the early dim. You kept it on, she said softly. I did, I answered. But not for them. Not anymore. The porch light wasn't a symbol of hope, not in the way people usually meant it. It wasn't lit in case someone decided to come back. It was there because I wanted it. Because I liked the way it made the steps glow. Because I liked the way it reminded me I wasn't hiding. She nodded. You ever think about turning it off? I shook my head. No, I just stopped opening the door for ghosts. She looked at me. Really looked, and something in her shoulders eased. Can I come back sometime? Just to sit again. Of course. She left an hour later. No grand goodbye. Just a quiet hug and a promise to return. As her car pulled away, I stood on the porch and looked out at the street. The neighborhood was settling in for the night, windows glowing, kids' laughter, fading dogs barking in the distance. I reached up and touched the porch light. Still warm. Still mine. Inside the house, waited, not empty, just spacious in the way peace always is. I closed the door behind me and walked into the kitchen where the kettle had just begun to sing. It came on a Thursday. Just past noon, while the soup simmered and the radio played something old and familiar. A message from Caleb. We were wrong. Can we come by? No timeline, no pressure. Just that. I read it once, then again. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment too long, as if my body hadn't caught up to what my mind already knew. I didn't feel the flood of hope I once would have. I didn't feel angry either, just still. I turned off the stove, set the lid on the pot, and carried my phone to the table where the red binder still lived, tucked away under a stack of recipes and notebooks. I sat. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to open the door again. But this message was different. No excuses, no casual tone, and maybe that's what made me pause. Because now, after all this time, it felt like he was knocking not as someone entitled, but as someone who might finally understand he was on the outside. I typed slowly. You can write me a letter. I'll read it if it's honest. No punctuation beyond the period. No signature, no softening. I pressed send. Then I turned the phone off completely. It didn't feel cruel. It felt clean. There would be no visit today. No coffee in mismatched mugs. No rehearsed apologies or hugs that smelled like strategy. If he wanted to be heard, he would have to write. He would have to sit down alone and use his hands for something other than expectation. I stood and walked to the sink, rinsing the spoon I'd used to taste the broth. The water ran hot and steady, humming against the basin. Outside the window, Margie waved from her porch as she clipped her last batch of late bloomers. I waved back. I poured the soup into 2 bowls, packed one for her, and carried it across the street. We talked about nothing, just the weather, a recipe she'd forgotten, a book neither of us finished. When I returned home, I set the second bowl on the table and ate slowly, savoring the warmth. No phones, no waiting, just my house. My meal, my time. I lit a candle before bed, not because anyone was coming, but because I liked the way the light danced across the wall. I brushed my teeth, folded a blanket on the couch, and paused once in the hallway. In the dark, the porch light still glowed. Not for anyone else. Just so I could find my way back if I ever needed it.